All right, welcome everyone to our session, Words Matter. I'll give everybody a couple of seconds to quiet down here. All right, so this session's on messaging and nomenclature for novel proteins. And if one needs proof that language matters for food, one can look no further than the humble avocado. We're right here in Northern California, where avocado toast is alive and well. And the avocado, until a group of California farmers banded together to rename it in the early 1900s, was called the alligator pear. And it suffered consumer confusion around its nature and its use until the industry aligned around this new appealing and heritage honoring name, the avocado. So today we have an excellent group of panelists here to discuss naming and messaging for two emerging platforms in alternative proteins, cultivated meat and precision fermentation. So we'll start with our cultivated meat panel. This will be followed by a flash presentation from Fiona Benny at Accenture on precision fermentation, and then also a subsequent panel on precision fermentation, nomenclature, and messaging. So to start, cultivated meat, we have seen the first products, very excitingly, hit restaurant menus in the US and in Singapore, paralleled with very ample media attention on this novel category. So this moment is an opportunity to connect with consumers and also win on narrative from day one. So we're going to dive in with some brief intros from our panelists. Nikki.
Hi, I'm Nikki Quinn, VP Marketing at Olive Farms. Big thanks to GFI for hosting us and putting on this great event and getting us all together at this important time for our industry. And great to be with all of you. I've been with Olive for about 4 years, started on the agency side. I've worn a few hats in my career, started in finance, moved to hospitality, also worked in retail, and then ultimately at a creative agency where I worked in sectors from with clients like Mondelez, Nestle, Four Seasons, Boss, so many different sectors. But I think, love a challenge. That's what excited me most about cultivated meat. As someone who's an ex-vegan, I'll say it. I'm just me now. I will say that, and someone who's sensitive to, the issues around food and sustainability from very early on, before most people, I just thought the promise was incredible, but also incredible challenging from a marketing perspective. So really excited to be discussing the important topic of messaging with you guys today. Thanks.
Are you a recovering vegan?
I would never say that.
Not necessarily.
No, I go through seasons, I think. I would intuitively mostly plants. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Barb Stuckey. I'm the Chief Innovation and Marketing Officer at Matson. We are a Silicon Valley-based product innovation firm. So we're working across the food and beverage industry, helping clients that range from very, very fresh startups, pre-revenue, all the way through multinationals. And we work with ingredient companies and food service operators, and we help them identify big ideas and then bring them to life with prototypes, and we help them commercialize them so that they can grow through new products.
Hi, everybody. Andrew Noyes. I lead global communications and public affairs for Eat Just. Want to start out by thanking GFI for hosting this important panel, as Nikki said, at a really pivotal time. I've been at Eat Just for almost 7 years. Which makes me a lifer. We obviously have the Just Egg side of our business, plant-based eggs, which you might have had for breakfast this morning. And also, as Emma mentioned, the distinction of being one of the two companies in the US that have regulatory approval to sell cultivated meat. We're also the first company in the world to receive regulatory approval full stop for cultivated meat in Singapore in late 2020. So excited to talk about our journey both in the US and Singapore on the meat side. And if anybody wants to talk about plant-based eggs, we can do that too.
Thank you, panelists. So one thing I do want to acknowledge that there has already been an immense amount of advocacy and research and creative work done on the cultivated meat platform. So Barb, I'd love to hear from you. What's the story of where we are today on cultivated meat nomenclature and how we got there?
Okay, well, we have to go way before the pandemic. It was 2018. And I was going to the Good Food Conference for the first year, and there was this new technology that everybody was talking about. It was cell-based meat, and it was clean meat, and it was lab-grown meat. And we had been watching it for a while, and we had just done some consumer insights work, because that's another thing we do is for our clients, but also for our own proprietary learnings. And so we knew a little bit about clean meat, which is that when you talk about clean meat, people say, oh, the cows were in a clean pasture, or the chicken was free range. And so that wasn't going to work, not to mention that it might just piss off the USDA and the Cattlemen's Beef Association. And there was this picture that was going around on the internet. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a Petri dish with some ground beef in it. And that was being the poster child for lab-grown meat. And anyway, we had the conference and everybody was really, really excited. And we are still excited about this technology. And after the conference, I was talking to some people, like not industry people, but other people. And I went up to Bruce and I said, Bruce Friedrich, for those of you who don't know, he's the executive director of GFI. And I said, nobody's going to eat something called lab-grown meat. Nobody is going to eat it. We're not going to be able to convince people to do this. We can't even do cell-based meat, and clean meat is not going to work. And at that moment, I said, let me make a proposition. What if we take on the project of trying to figure out what to call it? And this was before I even let our CEO, Justin, I don't know if you're in here. No, but I said, we'll do it pro bono. And he said, let me think about that. And then came back and said, hey, I think that's a really nice offer, and this is a great initiative. So what we did is we worked very, very closely with a team from GFI and a team from Upside Foods, back in the day, Memphis Meats. And we started, it was about a 9-month process of insights, ideation, more insights, strategy. And after many, many months of working on it, we came to the conclusion that cultivated was the name that was going to resonate the most. It's not perfect, and none of the names that we tested were perfect. But one of the things that, I'm sorry, I'm going to also just sort of jump into it. One of the things that we were really adamant about was having some kind of an infographic that could physically show what this was. So we used the analogy of plant cultivation or plant propagation and how that sort of maps over into what cultivated meat does. And so we developed this infographic, we developed a narrative, and then announced to the industry, you guys, that we had chosen cultivated meat. And thankfully, companies like Eat Just have gotten on board. And again, it's not perfect and it's not unanimous across the world, but it's a better word than lab grown, because consumers are not going to eat lab grown meat. So, we also just saw that, congratulations on getting the approval, and also to Upside, that USDA said in their response, cell cultivated, which is good. That's, better than what we thought it was going to be. So we're quite happy. So that's kind of where we are today. And I'm going to stop talking.
Thanks, Barb. And then let's jump all the way ahead to today. We have the exciting launches of these products on the market. And Andrew, I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the hottest messaging lessons from Cultivated Meat's introduction to the market in both Singapore and in the US?
It's a big question. Well, I think we need to obviously realize that you're dealing with two very different markets. So one size does not fit all. I'm sure Nikki's got thoughts on that as well. But I think when we've gone about messaging cultivated meat in Singapore and the US, we've done it in parallel with just beautiful imagery, delicious looking plated food. To Barb's point about that doctored image of that stock photo of the Petri dish with the meat on it, we still see that floating around on occasion, but we've also made a really concerted effort to replace that with the stock photo services and with the global news wires with actual beautiful, delicious food photography of our products. We've done that. Upside's done that. Other companies have done that. And I think you can't talk about nomenclature and shaping public perception around cultivated meat without having a visual. And I think in addition to the infographics that exist that GFI has put out and that other independent news organizations have put out, having those beautiful visuals makes a huge difference. I guess the one big takeaway that we have in Singapore is when I get into these arguments, and I think that the nomenclature thing is one of the discussions that I'm the most passionate about having, but also that I'm the most sick of having, mostly because it's me like beating away at reporters and editors who continue to call it lab grown. And we can get into like what their arguments for that are and why it's completely off base, in my opinion. But what we learned in Singapore is we went to market with a product at a very small scale. People ate it starting in December of 2020. They've been eating it ever since. They've been seeing it on the news. They've been hearing their government officials talk about it. They've experienced it themselves. Their friends have had it. They brought their family members to have it. And there's been I think research that came out, academic research that came out this week that showed that cultivated is the most appealing term of all of them, and the one that resonates the most and is the most neutral and is the most indicative of the process. And so, this notion that it's going to take a long time for American consumers to understand what cultivated meat is meaningfully, I think is false. I think if we get the word out to people through all the different means that we have to really explain this, what it is, how it's made, what it tastes like, then just like in Singapore, I think Americans will move much more quickly into understanding what it is. So that's probably the biggest takeaway that I've had from a couple of years of serving in Singapore and only a couple of months of serving in the US.
Great, thanks. And I think, the point that the cultivated term is not only appealing to consumers, but also understandable. And also it does an effective job, as effective as a lot of the other terms, on differentiating between conventional meat and this new product, right? I think that's a really important part of the equation, especially for the regulatory side as well. So let's talk a little bit more about marketing and benefits. There are a ton of different arguments for cultivated meat as a product compared to conventional meat, right? And Nikki, I'm curious what levers you are most excited about.
Sure. I think that while the topic that we're here to discuss today is messaging, the most important lever that we have in marketing is our product. So I think for all of the whole alternative protein sector, we cannot afford anything less but incredible, delicious products, because that's what people care most about, hands down, wherever you are in the world. So it's much more difficult to change someone's mind than it is to attract them with something that's objectively delicious. So lucky for us, and I know the case is for Good Meat too, that we have incredible products that deliver on the taste expectations, and also intend on producing incredible experiences. I'm a firm believer in educating through experience. So in addition to nailing your product, having incredible experiences, we introduce the product to market are paramount in order to make the connection emotional, not just conceptual, and to educate. So those are two marketing levers I think are extremely important. And really we have a very hands-on approach to the way we intend on launching and creating these experiences for people. And thirdly, partnerships are huge too. Partnerships help gain trust, and you learn a lot. For example, our chef partnerships. There's one we're about to announce, but one we've already announced with Chef Marcus Samuelsson. And chefs are just such an important part of the value chain and ultimately delivering these products to the public. And there's a lot that we can learn from having them as part of our teams in terms of positioning, which is another key element of our marketing arsenal. And also just creating incredible experiences. These are like masters of vibe, right? I mean, that's what brand really is. So just really excited to continue to learn from folks like Marcus and ultimately produce dope content with them and really sexy events. Because I think that what I like to call what I do aesthetic activism. So just trying to make the right things cool, because talking about the environmental stuff and the animal welfare, it's all well and good. It's not ownable, right? Too. It's true about, not that I want to, that we're not anywhere close to competing against each other. I look forward to the day when we actually are in market in such a way that someone might be choosing between good meat and olive cuts. That would be a dream. So I'm not as concerned about that. But I do think that we also have to remember as we build our brands to try to learn with much gratitude to the folks at Beyond and Impossible. They are why we are here and able to sit here. They've really paved the road for us. I think there's a lot that we can learn about being more about what you stand for than what you stand against, and being less about hanging your hat on we're plant-based or we're cell-cultivated or cultivated, whatever you want to call it. Honestly, who cares? A focus on your brand. I think that there's, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. But what I'm getting at is that, excuse me, I'm so sorry, I'm blanking. Well, it's just, I'm talking about partnerships and there's just the importance of how much we can learn from these chefs and building your brand and how it's even more important than the category level name nomenclature.
Can I just jump in really quick? Because I think all the points you made are really good ones, and it's kind of
except for the one I forgot. It's fine.
Except for that one. You can come back to it.
Yeah.
But I think everything that you've mentioned just now is what we've done in practice. So we had both the challenge of introducing cultivated meat to the world in Singapore for the first time ever, but also doing it in the context of a global pandemic at a place that was completely locked down. And so for the first year of our existence on the market, even at a very modest scale, we had to be very nimble, very creative as they were going through these waves of lockdowns in Singapore. We also wanted to provide people with a variety of different ways to experience and learn about good meat. So we started with immersive dinners. These were just these beautiful 360-degree audiovisual feast for the senses. And it just so happened that at the time, the government would only allow 4 to 6 people in a room. So it was perfect for an immersive experience, very intimate. We moved on from that to like a nice white tablecloth restaurant when restaurants in-restaurant dining started to open up a bit more. We pivoted from that to hawker stalls because we realized through our conversations on the ground there that the hawker community in Singapore, which is this just heritage cultural phenomenon in Singapore, was decimated by the pandemic, and we wanted to give back and get people back to those roadside hawker stalls. So we partnered with hawker stalls to do very cheap, very easy, affordable, familiar dishes. We did delivery, home delivery when they were on lockdown again. So we not only were bobbing and weaving and staying nimble as conditions evolved, but we also found a bunch of really interesting ways to introduce our product to people at a variety of different price points and through a variety of different preparations. And also partnered with incredible chefs in Singapore and in the US. Our first partner in the US is Jose Andres. He's also on our board. Couldn't ask for a better person to evangelize for what we're doing in food innovation and feeding people globally. And at his restaurant, they were in charge of what the dish would be when they launched, and I'm really glad they landed on what is just a very simple and delicious dish called Antichuchos de Pollo. And it's just basically these beautiful chicken skewers that are marinated, served with fresh vegetables, unadulterated. We're not like breading it and putting a bunch of dry ice or whatever around it. It is there to enjoy. And it's been a great way to introduce the product to people.
Great.
While you were speaking and I was listening, actually, also
She thought of her
what I
third
wanted
point.
to say. I just wanted to reiterate that I think it's really important to not just to say, okay, we're plant-based, we're cell-based, and really hang our hat just on that, because it's not going to be enough. You're not going to be building a brand. You really want to focus on more emotional aspects of connection. And again, just not like just what I call like there's the sea of same that you see in alternative proteins where everyone's sort of saying the same thing. And no wonder there's no consumer loyalty. In addition to the products sometimes underperforming, there's just no connection between the brand and the consumer.
Thank you. So we've talked a bit about different venues, different formats. I'm also curious about different consumer groups. Andrew, what are some of the groups that you're most excited to engage with, and how? And then from there, I'm liking this popcorning that's going on. Let's continue it.
The one thing that we've realized, that we've found, which is kind of a no-brainer, is people below the age of 25 are totally excited about it, totally open to it, understand why meat made in bioreactors is a cool thing, can be a delicious thing, can be a great thing for animals and the environment. It's the older generations that we've had a little trouble convincing. One of my favorite anecdotes, though, is a guy named Mr. Liu. He was the hawker that we launched with in Singapore. His family's hawker stall has been a popular destination for Singaporeans and visitors to Singapore for several generations. He was very hesitant when we approached him through a translator to explain that we wanted to serve cultivated chicken at his hawker stall. He was resistant at first. What really helped us turn the corner was when Mr. Liu, who I think is in his 70s now, actually cooked the chicken himself with his own recipe that people have come from miles to get, and he loved it, and it cooked the way that he wanted it to cook, and he plated it, and then that was like the initial bridge. And then when we launched, and he saw a line wrapped around the block of both people he'd never seen before at his hawker stall, but people who'd been frequenting his hawker stall for years, who were lined up to try it, he was all in. And so I think not everybody of that generation is going to be as quick to turn as Mr. Liu. He obviously had very specific reasons why he was, but we have learned, obviously, that folks who are much younger, consumers who are much younger, are much happier and more easily introduced to the whole concept and are excited to try it.
Yeah, and I think that the novelty coin also has another side,
Yep.
Right? Concerns from consumers about things like unknown risks. So how can the industry accelerate familiarity, given that consumers right now have very limited access to this product? So I'd love everyone's opinion on this, but let's start with Barb.
So, I have a lot of thoughts on risk. They're very varied. So I'll start with just food service operators. So I'm not going to go all the way to consumers yet, because Marcus Samuelson, Jose Andres, if you're working with chefs of that caliber, you probably don't need to explain so much to them. They're, these are guys who are really, really, really smart and experienced and open-minded. One of the things that we do for our clients is we do not only consumer research, but we do operator research. And so we have done a lot of talking to operators about cultivated meat opportunities. And Nikki and I were just talking about this earlier today, but one of the things that we found is that if you start the conversation talking about cultivated meat, let's just use chicken, cultivated chicken, and you can show them the product, you can have them taste the product, you can have a conversation about the benefits of the product and the operational impacts of the product. And then you get to the fact that here's the ingredient statement and they look at it and they go, why is there pea protein in this? And what is methyl cellulose? And they were pissed off. They were not happy that what we were showing them was a blended product. And we all know that, the industry is going to go to market with a blended product. It's going to be, it may be half plant-based, maybe less, and maybe more. But the point that I wanted to make about risk is that for everyday food service operators who are going to maybe find this through a Cisco catalog, if if everybody's really super successful, you have to communicate what the product is, and if it's not 100% cultivated meat, because what the operators we talked to were looking for was they thought the cultivated chicken was chicken. Like the ingredient statement was going to say chicken. And so it's a very complicated conversation to have. What do? You don't start with the ingredient statement because that would be weird. They would never go there first. It's food service. So there's a risk there in alienating those who you don't have an influencer relationship with at the operator level. And I don't know if anybody sat through the panel where Jennifer from Sodexo yesterday, when she was it was so fascinating to hear her talk about non-commercial food service operations. And there's so much opportunity for cultivated meat there. The other thing I want to talk about just in terms of risk, and this is more consumer, these days, I don't know if you've noticed, but we're in a very, very polarized society. And food is politics these days. And, the Center for Consumer Freedom has already taken shots at plant-based. They're going to come after cultivated if they haven't already. And there's disinformation that's going to happen. And brands like you guys are going to have to work to figure out how to get around that. And I think it's a big risk that consumers are going to be taught things that are not actually true. And I just think that's a huge risk that we as an industry need to be prepared for. Luckily, there's an organization like GFI who are going to, hopefully make sure that doesn't happen or remedy it.
Thank you. Nikki, Andrew, anything on consumer concerns?
Transparency. I mean, obviously, you don't want to wait until you're asked a question to provide information, and you need to be able to meet people where they are. Justin from WildType actually was talking about this at CMS a year ago. He's explained it really well. You need to be able to describe things at all different levels. You need to be able to explain this to a 5-year-old, to a middle schooler, to someone in college and a PhD, and to be able to explain it really simply. So I think that the key to answering these concerns is by addressing them and not waiting. And it has to be before they try the product in that setting and then after as well. And also collaborating with people who have larger platforms than us to help get our story out there and the truth out there. And I know we just have a few seconds left here. There's one thing I wanted to mention is that I think that nomenclature, we have a very Western perspective about this. I think that cultivated doesn't always translate, particularly in Asia. And we should consider this because they might not be the big market now, but China will be a bigger market than the US, in 10 years. So we should all keep them in mind. And it doesn't translate there, as well as the products. We're making Western products. So we should consider that when we design products for Asian cultures, what the foods that they actually eat and enjoy and connect with, such as your chicken and rice activation. I thought that was really smart, as well as certifications like halal and kosher. I think that's really important in order to have an inclusive approach internationally. So I just want to make sure I mention that as well.
Thank you, Nikki.
Yeah.
And we do have limited time, but I did want to end with a magic wand question, which is, from today, if there were one thing you could change or enable on the supply side, or one attribute you could adjust that would unlock a benefit for the consumer perception, what would it be?
On the supply side, okay. My magic wand would just be being able to meet demand.
Yeah,
I mean,
ditto.
we're at a single restaurant in Washington, D.C. We're at a single restaurant in Singapore, and we can't meet demand. We can't come anywhere close to meeting demand. And so, there are lots of things that we're doing on the technical and engineering and R&D side, and we know how we need to scale up, and we have that line of sight, but it's going to be a long time before we're in commercial mass commercial distribution. And I would just say my magic wand would be just to be able to meet demand at the single restaurants that we're currently operating in would be fantastic.
It's hard to say what else. I mean, our teams work so incredibly hard, so it's hard to right now sit here and say what else do I want from them. But I would just say more product. We need more. There's a lot of demand. There's a lot of excitement. So I would say that would be my wish. And also more money. Not personally. Well, yeah, sure, but yeah, just more investment in the industry and not relying solely on venture capital. It's not a good model for what we're doing all the time. So I think we need different types of investments. We need the government to get involved. We need infrastructure. I think that's beyond just the supply side, but while I was at it, it's a slippery slope, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot needed. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, let's give our panelists a round of applause. And then next up, we are excited to share a flash presentation from Fiona Benny at Accenture, who will be discussing some open questions and early findings from research that GFI and Accenture are partnering on, exploring nomenclature and messaging for dairy and eggs made with precision fermentation across 5 different geographies. We also will thank the Precision Fermentation Alliance and Food Fermentation Europe for their input on this project. So Fiona, we'll let you take it away.
Okay. Amazing. Wow, there are so many people in this room. It's really, really lovely to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Emma and GFI, and thank you for the partnership in this work that we're doing together. It's just fantastic to be here in such great company. I just love being part of the whole alt protein space. The energy and ambition is just so exciting. And I know there's so many amazing things to come in the coming years. So my name is Fiona Benny. I co-lead Accenture's sustainability work with the consumer goods industry practice, as well as our global future of food practice. We work across food on a number of levels and really across the themes that are looking to create a truly sustainable and equitable food system. So from nutrition-led innovation to circular design to sustainable agriculture, and of course, alternative proteins. We know that the food system needs a radical overhaul, and precision fermentation has a super exciting role to play. So what I wanted to share with you today is some of the emerging findings from the work that we're doing with the Good Food Institute. We're conducting consumer research across 5 markets, so North America, France, Germany, Spain, and the UK. Trying to understand what messaging and nomenclature might work best across these different markets, across different demographics, as we look to position PF-made ingredients and products in the market. We've spoken to some of you in the room. Emma mentioned the GFI and Food Fermentation Europe in particular. Thank you so much for all of your help. We've also been working with wider food industry stakeholders, doing lots of interviews to try and understand everyone's perception of what this whole landscape looks like and where PF fits into consumer-facing comms and messaging. So more specifically, a series of one-to-one consumer interviews, stakeholder interviews, focus groups, and we're about to launch into a quant survey across the 5 markets, reaching just over 5,000 consumers. No, I'm still just introducing, although actually it was just this one for now. Just an example of some of what we're putting in front of consumers. So with all of this, I guess it's no surprises that it's pretty complex. It hasn't been remotely straightforward. There have been plenty of surprises and curveballs on the journey so far. It hasn't been a dull moment for the last 4 months of doing the research. What I'm going to share is short and sweet. We're about 70% of the way through the research, so it's just a taster of what's to come once we complete the research and make sense of the findings. And I hope that it will help to fuel the panel discussion, which I know is going to be super helpful as we continue along this research journey. So it all started with technology. It seems very obvious. This is what has made precision fermentation food possible. The PF journey is R&D at its finest and crucially working to help solve what really seems at the moment like an insurmountable challenge, feeding 9 billion people without irreversibly wrecking our planet. However, hopefully this is going to work. For mass adoption, it is people that really hold the key to success. So for PF made ingredients and products, they really live or die from our perspective with people, their attitudes, opinions, habits, and behaviors. Mass adoption is not going to happen without a really, really deep understanding of consumers. This is a big leap and a big ask for them. They're busy, they're preoccupied, they're in a hurry, they're set in their ways, they're all of those things at once. So just getting their attention is by no means a given, but holding it to the point of habitual purchasing patterns is going to take a fair amount of really careful and considerate work. So with all this in mind, where do we start? We need to go back to where it all began, to what it is that consumers feel so deeply about when it comes to dairy and eggs, which is the particular focus of this research. So for example, entrenched expectations. Animal milk, we're finding, is really fixed in people's minds. So across all the different geographies that we're talking to, it's almost entirely viewed as healthy. It's what we feed our kids when we're good parents. It's a source of calcium. It's something natural. It's something wholesome. And if we look here at some of the quotes, dairy's huge. It's in mac and cheese. The chicken could be breaded in buttermilk. It's in all different areas of what we eat. And really going back to this person from France talking about the dawn of time, humans have always consumed animal milk. And now you're asking us to consume milk that's not from an animal. And I can imagine you're thinking, well, what about the growth in plant-based categories? And I guess here we are talking about mass consumers who haven't even got to that point yet of moving over to anything that's plant-based. So this is one particular area that we've been diving into to understand more deeply. From a memory perspective as well, there's so much that's evocative and emotional and very, very powerful from a kind of fond memories perspective. The homeliness of milk, of a dippy egg, as my kids call it, the familiarity, the rituals and the habits that have been formed. So people have very, very fond memories of childhood, which makes this whole space extremely emotive. And all of this is underpinned by cultural narratives. So the Got Milk campaign came up so much in the research that we did in the USA. So the idols with milk moustaches, messaging around how it's good for you. All of this messaging and nomenclature has been reinforced over the years. So it's very much entrenched in our attitudes towards milk and dairy and eggs. In the context of today, this is an extremely noisy, crowded, and complex market for consumers. So that we have a multitude of brands, claims, category norms, category novelties. The supermarkets and online supermarkets are super crowded. And this is very much led by habit. So the rituals I mentioned earlier are baked into shopping habits too. We reach for the familiar, sticking to what we know. And to add to the complexity, some consumers have just got their heads around plant-based milks and products, and we're asking them to think about something completely different. Okay, there we go. So we're asking a lot of them. We're asking them to reimagine the foods they feel familiar with and attached to, and this deep emotional food culture. And our research is starting to share the scale of this ask. We knew it was a big ask when we started out. I know some of you have already done research in this space. We know that it's complex. So we've got 4 particular challenges that we wanted to share today that we thought would be helpful to set the scene for the panel. The first one, we're calling the desirability catch-22. So people want to know what it is. They're super curious, but they don't actually like the full explanation when you go into the full detail of what precision fermented products are and how they've been created. So the most accurate way to describe PF dairy and egg is arguably to say it's made by fermentation. But if people aren't that keen on fermented dairy or fermented egg as terminology, should we be accurate and avoid confusion, but risk turning people away and turning people off from the product? Or do we move on to talk about a story that isn't about fermentation? So to give an example, in Germany and Spain, there was much more openness to trying this new food, provided the benefits were clearer and it was marketed as innovative. Whereas in the UK, France, and the US, the questions were very much around the naturalness of the process and whether there would be any long-term health implications. So we really are stuck between this catch-22 situation of wanting more detail, but not too much. And we need to tread that line super carefully. The next one is, oh, wow, this really does have a mind of its own. The innovation paradox. And this will be familiar, I'm sure, to everyone in the room. PF-made food is an incredible scientific achievement, but people definitely do not want to eat scientific food. And there's a really important nuance to this, which is that people, all the people we've spoken to, this is across all the markets, associate good tasting food, and we know taste is king, with natural food, with real food, and other terminology in that space. And they very quickly make the assumption that if it's come from science, that it will not have the taste factor that they're looking for. It won't taste the same. So for example, a quote is, I would still try it if it's good. Maybe I would buy it again, but it has to be bang on for both taste and cost. And of course, those benefits, costs coming very, very quickly after taste, are really paramount. The next one is, speaking of benefits, abandoned benefits. And this is a really, really complex space, and we're learning a lot here from the research. And there's a lot of parallel with how we've been marketing sustainability within food as well. So whilst PF-made food might be good for animals and the planet, most people are not proactively seeking these benefits. It's not what people are thinking about first and foremost when they make purchasing decisions. So mass market consumers, not vegans, not those worried about the climate, who haven't taken any action in terms of purchasing decisions for animal welfare or for the environment, they believe that reducing meat consumption is more important than reducing dairy, for example. They can't see much of an issue with, well, if I move to organic or cage-free eggs, surely that's it. Surely I'm kind of doing my bit. And usually when consumers are asked in a survey, for example, they would say that sustainability, that the environment, that animal welfare, that human rights are of absolute importance to them, that they care about these things really, really deeply. But these benefits are often abandoned at the point of purchase because other priorities come into play. Everyday benefits, like the need for something to be delicious, healthy, good for my family, affordable, convenient, all of those things that are the primary benefits that we look for when we buy products. And in the case of sustainability, and arguably for PF, it's hard to understand. So this whole confusion factor cannot be underestimated. And for the benefits to be super, super clear, and those that people genuinely feel meet their values and are relevant to them. Then lastly, is the third realm. And this we've spent a lot of time talking to consumers, a lot of time talking amongst ourselves about this one. So we divide the world of food into 2 realms, an animal one and a plant one. And most people don't believe there's a third one that would be good for them and would taste good too. So PF is neither animal or plant, and yet it's kind of both of these things. It's incredibly confusing. I'm sure you've all tried to describe it to friends who aren't within this industry, and it's easy to get tongue-tied and for them to start to feel confused. We're asking them to imagine something entirely new and something that fundamentally doesn't fit into their framework of how they see the world and how they divide up food. Generally, anything we can't place makes us nervous and suspicious, and it's not a recipe for quick fire adoption. So to give a quick example here, across all markets, people will try to understand the base material or the origin of the product. And when they weren't able to clearly categorize it as plant or animal, they would often make the assumption and jump into, well, it must be chemical or it must be artificial. So really understanding how we create this, Christian, you described it earlier as this third category, and understanding how we describe it and create a really, really clear framework around it is really important. So that is everything. And I just wanted to end, if it moves, there we go. So hopefully this has provided a little food for thought for how we approach the critical question of consumer adoption. From our perspective, we need to be incredibly considered, deeply thoughtful about the realities of consumer attitudes and perceptions, their willingness to try, and then crucially, their willingness to continue to buy. Because we are, after all, chasing the mass market here, not the vegans, not those that worry about animal welfare and the climate. And for mass market, the game plan needs to be meticulously well thought through. So very keen to continue the conversation. Anyone in the room who would like to give us their feedback or input as we keep going on this journey, we'll be releasing whatever comes from the research at some point in the autumn or the fall. And yeah, happy to continue the conversation in the panel. Thank you.
Invite our PF panelists to the stage. You should still be good with it. All right. Okay, so we're going to flip right into introductions since we have limited time. So Christian, would you like to start?
Yes. This works, right? Yes, hello, I'm Christian from German precision fermentation company called Formal. We make exactly both dairy and egg replacements using precision fermentation, 4-year-old company. Yeah, I lead public affairs, policy, and sustainability with Formal. So I'm the least marketeer person on the panel here. So I guess I can talk about what works with other stakeholders maybe a little bit, but we'll also try to explain a bit about our research that we've done. And yeah, Irina, you go.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Irina Gerry. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Change Foods. We are a precision fermentation company as well, focused on casein protein, which is a critical ingredient to make cheese taste and stretch and melt and be amazing. So we're really focused squarely on that space. I do come from the kind of a marketing universe. I was, before joining Change Foods, at Danone, spent about 6 years working on a plant-based beverages and food. So brands like Silk and So Delicious were my babies for a very long time. So I'm deeply familiar with plant-based universe and educating consumers about what plant-based was, because it wasn't long ago when that term wasn't exactly familiar to us. So kind of bring a little bit of that history in and now focus on creating this new category, new way of thinking about food.
Hi, I'm Barb Stuckey. I wrote a book about the science of taste called Taste What You're Missing.
Wow, I haven't written a book, but I'm Fiona. I already introduced myself.
Buy the book, everybody.
Okay, so one of the first opportunities for precision fermentation is explaining the way that the ingredients and products are made. Barb, I'd love to hear from you some of the best practices in explaining these concepts.
Okay. So we have some quantitative data. I know Accenture, you guys are getting to it, but I want to clarify that our studies are very different. So our study is only the US, and it is not focused on eggs and dairy, but all potential categories that might fit under precision fermentation. So that is, when I refer to data, that's kind of what I'm talking about. Other thing to know is that this is general population. So anything I quote is not a specific group. It's matched to the US population. So, obviously one of the things to do is to focus on the benefits. And I'll start with the easy part, which is if there's a benefit that you can talk about in a positive way versus a negative way, that works a lot better with people. People want to hear positivity. So the difference might be, for example, slaughter-free, which was actually a name that came out of the work that we did on cultivated meat. Slaughter-free. Who wants to hear the word slaughter in your food? Not at all. So something that, we care about animal welfare. That's a much more positive message. So we asked a long list of benefits of consumers, which of these are most important to you, after we showed them a concept. So we showed 3 different concepts. One we called low science, which basically said this is a very sustainable way to produce food and blah, 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 and not a lot of science, then a medium science, and then a high science. Across all consumers, the number one benefit was that it was real, fill in the blank, real milk, real egg, whatever, ... and not plant-based. That was the number one benefit, not plant-based. So what do we make of that? Is plant-based food wrong? No, of course not. But consumers have heard things about plant-based being processed. They perhaps had an experience with a plant-based food that wasn't great and they got soured on it. So I think it is absolutely important. Both of my panelists on the cultivated meat panel said it. It's all about food tasting good, being a part of your culture, really focusing on getting the food right so that we are never in a position where people are rejecting things outright. So now there's 2 parts of it, right? Real. And I think that I also want to focus on that because that's the positive. It's real egg. It's real dairy. It's real whatever it is. So those things really, really resonate with consumers.
Yeah, just one quick comment. Maybe something we've seen is while we also analyze all the factors that you just described, at the end of the day, when we look at behavioral psychology, which we've done, we need to accept the reality that consumers are not analytical or they don't follow a certain logic when they actually make their purchasing decision. So I think it's really important for us to understand that and try to understand how do consumers think in general. But at the end of the day, what we need to create is, in the first step, awareness, what's really out there. We are completely, like we said earlier, new category. There's zero awareness outside of our conference here about the potential of fermentation-enabled technologies. Then the next step would be, to us, clarity. Like, what is this even? Because explaining fermentation, and then we have the subgroups of fermentation-enabled technology, because precision fermentation is not the only one. You have biomass fermentation, you have traditional fermentation. Explain this to a consumer. I mean, this is basically impossible. Then in the last step, even if you get that done, that clarity done, how do we create that desirability? And I think these 3 steps kind of in the logic in what we need to think, and just keep in mind, we need to just generally make people hungry. They just need to want to eat and want to eat this specifically. And we need to get to a place where they don't think if I eat this, how much CO2 emissions am I saving? Or, what is this doing for diversity? We really care about this. Consumers care, but they don't care as a priority when they purchase goods.
Thank you, Irina. I'd also love to get your thoughts on definitions and explanations given the company perspective.
I do think that's what I think Fiona alluded to, and what you're talking about is food inherently is an emotional category. And we right now are in the scientific realm, right? We're still in R&D. We're still developing these products. We're still really focused on technology part, right? How do we do this? How do we manufacture it? How do we scale it? A lot of it what we care about right now as an industry is technology, right? And honestly, the cognitive case for why this needs to exist, the sustainability, the water, et cetera, we can all recite those facts. And so our entire industry exists in a cognitive space. Consumers don't. When you look at food, when we pick food, it's all emotional, right? It's all about me, now, pleasure, connection, love. Those are all emotional triggers. Almost none of us choose foods based on a cognitive calculation. If we did, we would all be eating kale salad all day. We would be in perfect shape and weight, and we would never be seduced by a donut at the airport, right? So I think acknowledging that reality is really, really important, because the way we communicate needs to be on a very different wavelength. It does not need to be at a cognitive wavelength. It has to be at the emotional wavelength. What that means is leading with taste, leading with product. And the conundrum we face is that when you ask people what they aspire to do in a survey, they want to eat healthy, they want to be sustainable, they don't like animal cruelty. But when they choose foods, they choose them in a very, very different set of priorities. And communicating these cognitive benefits, it almost becomes irrelevant. So when we say what to whom becomes very, very important. We still have to build the case for why change needs to happen. Because if there is no reason for them to explore anything else, why would they? Why bother with the cultivated meat or plant-based milk or anything else that's other than familiar if you have no reason to do it? So I do think it's important to build the case, the cognitive case, but we shouldn't be doing that at store. We shouldn't be doing it at the restaurant, right? So we need to communicate different things to different people at different points. When it comes to food, it has to be delicious and it has to deliver. But the conundrum we face is that what we love about food is the familiar, right? People love that we have this emotional connection to meat, to dairy, to eggs. This is what my mom made. This is what my comfort food is. This what just tastes great, right? And it's currently at a conflict with what it's doing to the planet, what it's doing to the animals, et cetera. So we have this cognitive dissonance. And unfortunately, when we lead with this technological communication, we are building a case at a cognitive level, but it's so deeply disconnected between what people consider natural, what they consider good for them, what they consider to be normal, and what they just consider to be kind of within the realm of what they are used to, right? And it's so hard to thread that needle and to strike that balance that I think every time, even in the survey research work that we're doing now, we're seeing this huge disconnect between the cognitive, the habitual, and what people's perceptions are. And like you said, Barb, they want real. Can we really promise real, though? Because we will quickly run into an issue if I say, this is real milk. It's not going to be too long before detractors will come and say, well, really, you only made one protein. It's not exactly real. And, there's one molecule difference, blah, 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 blah. Now they feel like we've been lying to them. And there's nothing worse than deceiving consumers if you promise them something that you don't deliver. As you mentioned, if you are saying it's cultivated chicken, but all of a sudden there's 6 ingredients, including things that we don't want to see, now I feel deceived on top of being, maybe not getting the right product experience. So I think there's a lot of issues. I know I'm not offering solutions, but I think leading with empathy and understanding that consumers are in a very, very emotional state of mind, and how we communicate to them at the right point is incredibly important.
Thank you. And I want to jump into these contexts where consumers will come across these products, right? So there's a lot of context where nomenclature will be applied in social contexts, ranging from conversations with friends and family to seeing these products in the media, as well as on the front of the product packages, and then also in the ingredient list, right? These are different areas. One open question is, do we need to be using the same term across all of these areas? So I'd love to get, Fiona, your thoughts on where we are today in using and testing different terms for these different use cases.
Yeah, so I don't think there's a one size fits all where we say the same thing everywhere. And just thinking about different types of consumers, the ones who are never ever gonna, they today wouldn't even turn a product round to look at the ingredients list. They have no interest. They're interested in what's the front of the pack, what the brand is telling them, what their perception of the brand and the product and the taste and all these things we've been talking about, to the ones that are much more concerned about the number of ingredients, what types of ingredients, the familiarity of ingredients, and so on. So yeah, starting to test some of those phrases and terms. And, you know, you saw the sketch we showed earlier. You know, it's literally just putting some of this terminology on something that feels a little bit familiar to try and get a response and understand people's responses to that, and how they feel about the place. I mean, a nice anecdote that we're learning about is, for some reason, precision fermentation seems to be more acceptable in some markets for more indulgent categories, where they might feel like they want to experiment a little more, versus the ones that are more the staples, like the milk and the yogurt and the things they buy all the time. Is it? I don't know, because there tends to be more innovation in those categories. So there's, you know, a wider variety maybe of ice cream brands, for example, of different flavors, of novelties coming through potentially. But that, for example, was one thing that kind of stopped us in our tracks and was like, okay, this is something interesting. How come it feels more acceptable in those indulgent categories versus the ones that are more kind of everyday? Question.
Great, thank you. Irina, I'd love to get your thoughts as well on different use cases.
I don't know that I've seen, obviously there's kind of core products, right? Milk, eggs. And what we're up against, I think more so than with meat, because meat has a greater degree of awareness of, you know, the sustainability challenges, the animal welfare challenges. When you get into the milk and the egg space, the awareness drops, like it's low single digits. Like people perceive dairy to be sustainable and healthy. They think eggs are sustainable and healthy. And we've been at it for a long time with plant-based, right? And it's considered to be a success story. It's 16% market share for plant-based milk. Like, let's not get carried away. This is still not the majority of the category. And then you get into cheese and yogurt, et cetera. It's less than 5%. It's low single digits. And the reason for that is these are staples. And again, people don't necessarily think they need a different options, right? And we've seen this in research. Eggs are considered pretty awesome, right? Milk is considered natural. And to break away and to kind of peel away at people, you need to give them not only the cognitive reasons, but also you need to give them amazing product experiences. Nobody likes cheese. They love cheese, right? Like, don't mess with my pizza. It's a very emotional experience. People will come after you if you say bad things about bacon. I know this. And because it's undermining our cultural, it's undermining our habitual, it's undermining what's pleasurable. And again, if you look at humans as emotional beings, we post-rationalize our behavior. So if I like milk, I like eggs, I will come up with a million reasons why they're natural and good and justify my behavior, even though you might be telling me about sustainability and animal welfare issues. So we're seeing a lot of this emotionally driven decision-making in a category that's very much foundational to our food. And I find that that's the more kind of basic you go, the harder it is, because the deeper the attachment is, the more kind of fancy processed you go, the less that attachment is. Then you get to be more in an experimental stage. So all the way to a fancy restaurant, where I might eat something that's foamed and made out of exotic plants, and I will be super excited about this. But that's not necessarily something that I would, you know, bring home to my kids and feed and do this every day, right? So I think, again, it's how do we break through some of these barriers and how do we attack it from an emotional standpoint and almost the tribal standpoint. And I know you mentioned that food is politics. I think it's very, very important to kind of, again, place this in human context where we are tribal creatures. We want to eat what our tribe eats. This is how we evolved, right? We shared meals, and it's still very much part of our culture. And so how do we create these mini tribes or identify mini tribes that are open to these new experiences, that have the basic, you know, level of understanding of the cognitive case, but then give them the experiences that are still enjoyable, delicious, and are part of our culture. So I feel like that's another layer to not only is it the product category, but it's also who and when you introduce this to. That's very, very important.
Thank you. Yeah, and I do think that in alt proteins writ large, we're finding that it's not only the value proposition, like in the abstract in a vacuum that's important, it's the switching proposition, right? What's going to get people to switch from a conventional product to a product made with precision fermentation. So I love everyone's thoughts. We can start with Fiona and move down on this question of what are the benefits of these products that are going to be the most appealing to consumers and get them to actually try and switch.
I do think that we have to stick to the existing benefits, which is taste, and everything falls by the wayside. And I think some of the learnings we've had from plant-based, Barb, I think you mentioned people have been turned off potentially from some of the products that haven't quite worked from a taste perspective. So without that, and Nikki, you mentioned as well, it's all about product. If you don't have a good product, you don't really have anything to market and to go out there with in the first place. I think the secondary benefits, you could lean into some of the benefits that we know are super important, whether it is climate, sustainability, animal welfare, and those things, but they are very, very secondary. And they're for those people that might go online to explore more, that are more curious and are more conscientious with their food choices for their family, for themselves. I do think the nutrition dynamic is really, really important. And the work that we're doing across the food industry at the moment, we're seeing the dovetailing of climate and decarbonization of food portfolios being on the one side, and then the need for nutrition-led innovation. So this is less about reducing sugar, reducing salt, taking out the bad, and more about putting in the good, like creating genuinely nutritious products. So I think if the PF community and if the ingredients and products can align with that, can demonstrate that there is significant nutritional value in the products and ingredients that are coming through, then that really it's that secondary benefit. It's kind of piggybacking onto what's going to happen and needs to happen across the food system for sustainability, but also for human health. We were talking earlier about the statistics and trajectory for obesity. So over 50% of adults will be obese by 2050 on our current trajectory. And, food players, the big food CPGs know this. They know they're part of the problem and they're working towards a solution. And I think PF can be positioned as part of that solution.
I think the clearest thing that we can do is statements of fact, which is no different than any other category in the grocery store, and we work in all of them. So what do I mean by a statement of fact? This scramble contains 6 grams of protein. That's a statement of fact. And if you're an egg, or if you're a plant-based egg, or you're a precision fermented egg, and you have 6 grams of protein, talk about the 6 grams of protein. That resonates with consumers. They want to know, to your point on nutrition, they want to know what's in there. If you have a benefit over the conventional product, like this egg contains no cholesterol, that's a statement of fact. And that is a claim that resonates not with everyone, but with a certain part of the population. So giving them statements of fact about the product is, I think, the easiest, cleanest, safest way that you can communicate. I also want to just say, consumers, we were talking about how they're not rational. So we were doing focus groups on a precision fermented product, and everyone in the 2 focus groups that had cycled through, every single person had at least one concern. I'm concerned about this, I'm concerned about that. And so some of them said, I need to go home and do some research. And so we knew that we hadn't figured it out yet. So right before they left, we said, by the way, we have prototypes and we're thinking about having you come back in to taste them. Would anyone like to taste it? Every single person in all of the focus groups raised their hand. These were people that were wildly concerned in some cases about what this product was. Everyone wanted to taste it. And our quant data, the national study we did with US consumers, GenPop, 2/3 of people had top 2 box purchase intent, full 2/3. And this is whether or not they got the low science, the medium science, or the high science. So it's really broadly appealing if, you've put the right message in front of the right person. So I think there's a lot that can be done to get people on our side. I don't think we're there yet.
I think piggybacking on that a little bit, and the fact that we think of these basic animal foods as natural. We need to stay as close to the basic natural foods as possible without being deceiving. What I mean by that is when consumers want an egg, they want an egg. They don't want a science experiment. When they want a pizza, they want cheese on it. They don't want to hear about your bioreactors and, fancy chemicals and FBS and whatever else we might be thinking. And so it's really important that while this is an incredibly exciting scientific achievement, that we take the science out of it when we are in the food context and food environment. And you guys both talked about this, and I think that's so, so important, because there is this massive disconnect between when we are thinking and talking about food and in a focus group environment, in a cognitive case, we say all those things. Well, when we go into the store, when we go into the restaurant, we want the thing we're most familiar with, both from a name, from a packaging, from experience point of view. And so ideally, if I had a magic wand, we would just say milk, eggs, cheese, chicken, right? We know that's not possible. So then it becomes, how close to that could I stay? Still tell you what it is, still tell you what it isn't, and give you just enough to cue the experience. Because what I find most important about nomenclature work is because we organize our world by language, right? We're a language-based species. And so what we call something matters a great deal. And we know this, we've been fighting the nomenclature battles. Like you say, would you like some lab-grown meat? Hell no, right? Would you like, chicken? Absolutely. And, don't really care how it was made, right? In many ways. And we fought this on plant-based milk. If there's a reason we don't call milk lacteal secretions of, coved animals or whatever that is. So that's important. And so we want to place our products in the context with the words, with the right experiences. And the challenge is, how do you create just enough difference to tell them that this is different? And I don't want to just tell you that it's different because I don't like animal products. I want you to know, because there's a benefit, right? There's a benefit of it being free from animals. There's a benefit of it not containing cholesterol. There's a benefit of it being more sustainable. But we have to thread that needle ever so carefully, because when we add words like precision fermentation, that's too sciencey, right? That's too petri dish. Anything about the lab, anything about even food technology, it's like, cool, I don't want to eat this. Right. And I frequently find myself explaining what I do to people who have no idea about the food tech space. And oftentimes I get like, this is really cool. But I can see in their back of their mind, they're like, there's no way I'm giving this to my kids. Because it's technology, and there's this fear of technology, and there's this kind of rejection of new in food, like that. It's more so than in other aspects of our lives. We really reject novelty in food because just how we are built, and we like this familiarity. So when it comes down to language, I think it's so important to nail what are these key words that cue familiar, category, and most importantly, experience. Like, what am I going to get out of? What is it going to taste like? What is it going to do in my coffee? What is it going to melt like in my pizza? And words communicate almost everything we need to know, and the pictures, right? So like what Andrew mentioned is show real food in real context is critical, but also call it as close to the original product as you can is also very, very critical.
Thank you. Christian, any thoughts on the switching proposition for these products?
No, just like definitely reiterate what Irina said, but emphasizing that, because you were asking about the benefits of precision fermentation. To me, it feels like I don't know, 80% of the panel, we spoke about challenges and problems, which are massive, obviously, but I think the potential of precision fermentation, also compared to cultivated meat, for example, is we can lean on an ancient technology that we are all using, fermentation. Everybody knows what that is. Everybody can connect other products that they have consumed their life for their entire life to that technology, everything going beyond the protein part. Like, for example, with Formal, we use traditional cheese making technology, right? So that big part of the product creation process is literally something that people have consumed their entire lives. So I think that is a big benefit of precision fermentation. Another one, seriously, is it will be easier to scale than, for example, cultivated meat. The challenges are definitely there, scaling challenges, but they're not as large, as big as in our neighboring sector of cultivated meat. And I think then at the end of the day, we had it before, the potential of the technology to make products that are, in terms of performance, taste, indulgence, not differentiable by consumers to animal products. Like literally, if you were to come on the Formal site in Berlin, I would give you a blind tasting. You would literally not be able to tell the difference between animal cheeses and Formal cheeses. The only difference as an upside that you would taste is compared to plant-based cheeses, because they obviously suck. It's true. It is true. So yeah, a bunch of, I mean, we don't need to like go back to all the societal, social, environmental benefits. That's clear cut. Everybody knows it in this room. It's secondary for consumers and for marketing successes. But yeah, I think pretty straightforward stuff.
Thank you. And thank you, panelists. We are quickly running out of time. I want to wrap up by saying that all protein stakeholders aligning on messaging is a really important step that can improve the sector's growth. We actually are seeing advances on this around the world. And in particular, we're happy to report that GFI APAC is supporting a new industry initiative launching next month. It's called Communication Leadership in Future Foods, or CLIF. And the program is aiming to guide companies on effective risk communication strategies that can dispel misinformation and also ensure that novel foods like cultivated meat, like precision fermentation, have a smooth path to market. So Mirta and Ryan from GFI APAC are here. They're waiting in the back there if anybody would like to meet up after the session and get more involved in that program. So in sum, I think while the messaging world for many of these novel protein platforms is wide open, many questions clearly remain. Companies and coalitions are building a knowledge base for effective messaging to accelerate consumer uptake and ultimately support an alternative protein industry to deliver on its promise.